The movie begins 22 years ago when a man is speaking to the lead nun of an orphanage. He's telling her that he must take the children for the survival of humankind and that these children were specially selected. While they're conversing, a man walks into the room and tells the doctor that all 19 of the children have been prepared for transport except for one. As they look for him, we see the child hiding in the room where the generator is kept, while he watches two monstrous creatures in front of him. Meanwhile, the nun tells the police that all the kids simply disappeared. Edward is startled awake by a bad dream while he is on the airplane. The child in the next seat who had seen him have a nightmare playfully tells him that his parents always tell him that there is nothing to be afraid of in the dark. Checking that the child's mother is asleep, Edward tells the child that his parents were wrong and that they say that because they don't know the truth, scaring the child. After the airplane lands, Edward leaves the airport and catches a cab. On the road, the driver asks Edward what he did for a living, and he explains that he was a paranormal investigator. While the surprised driver asks more questions, Edward notices that there is a man following them and asks his driver to lose him. After a long chase, the driver manages to corner Edward in a market by slamming the car into them. The man then gets out of the car and attacks Edward in an attempt to take the artifact in his pocket. After a laborious fight, Edward manages to kill his attacker by impaling him. In the museum, new shipments have arrived for Dr. Hudgens and Aline, the museum. His assistant curator is forced to accept them because the doctor had gone on another archaeological mission. Out in the open sea, Hudgens has uncovered a sunken ship that he thinks contains the Erebus. Whaling it into the large boat he had chartered, he watches as they gently set it down. After his fight with the assailant, Edward goes to his loft, making sure that he isn't being followed. He then checks his messages and gets one from his friend John, who tells him that his nightmares were back and asks if it was only him. The message ends with a request for a call as soon as he returns. Ignoring the message, Edward sits on his chair and begins to examine his artifacts. Out in the middle of the ocean, the ship captain sees the container that they had pulled out and realizes it was made of solid gold. Watching the man marvel at the treasure, Hudgens tells the man that the Abkhani were the first ones to use solid gold because they believed it contained evil spirits. Salivating at the treasure, the captain orders his men to throw Hudgens in the cabin and opens the box despite Hudgens' pleading. Locked inside the cabin, Hudgens heard the screaming of the crew as something came out of the open box and attacked them. As soon as the box is open, Edward and a few others around the city enter a trance-like state and abandon everything they're doing as if they had a mission. Once the sound on the ship quiets down, Hudgens goes out of the cabin and finds the place covered in blood, the crew members all dead. Walking toward the box, he sees that it has already been opened. Getting closer, he pulls a latch that opens another door and finds a small artifact inside. Picking it up, Hudgens hurries away from the boat. At Bureau 713, the Agency for Paranormal Investigations, agents are panicking due to the sudden spike in strange activity. After the head agent, Richard, was informed, he hurried to the control room and found out that EMF was off the charts from one of the technicians. In his loft, Edward wakes on the floor by the loud ringing of his phone. Getting up, he answers and finds out his friend John had gotten up in the middle of the night and disappeared from his panicking wife. Edward knew that, from the Abkhani legend, when the doors between the human world and the world of darkness opened, a few people survived by joining forces with the creatures on the other side, giving them supernatural powers but taking away their humanity. Edward had a sneaking suspicion that this was what was happening to his friend John. Edward calls an old friend from Bureau 713, where he used to work before quitting, by the name of Sam, and asks to track down the 19 kids who had grown up in his orphanage and finds out they were all missing. After his meeting, Edward heads to the museum to see his girlfriend, Alien. When she sees him, she is excited at first, but then gets angry because he has disappeared for 3 months. Edward explains all of his endeavors for the past couple of months and shows her an artifact that he had found. He then asks her if she could decode the transcription, but she tells him it was impossible because all the artifacts were hidden in different parts of the world. While they're conversing, the lights start to flicker, so the two leave to check it out. In the main part of the museum, a guard gets attacked and killed by a large reptile-type beast, which becomes invisible at will. After seeing the guard's fallen body and hearing a growl, Alien and Edward begin to run, closely followed by the creature. While the two find a closet to hide in, the museum roof is broken through, and dozens of Bureau 713 agents jump in, getting the beast and the situation under control. Richard, who was leading the mission, warns Edward to stay away because he isn't on the force anymore, and any information must remain classified. During the argument, Edward manages to steal Richard's office keycard to help him find out more information. Once he leaves the vicinity, Edward goes to the bureau and heads up to the lab, where he finds Sam working on Edward's earlier victim. The coroner shows him an organism attached to the man's spine and tells him that he used to be an agent 20 years ago. As Sam checks the single, he is shocked to find a reading on Edward. After getting a scan, they found out that there was another symbiotic organism attached to Edward's spine, but it was dead because he had been severely electrocuted as a child. Sam then explains more about the creature on his back and the one they found in the museum, giving him special ammunition and information to beat them. Later that night, Sam gets called by Richard, who chastises him for meeting with Edward and giving him information. He warns that he will fire him if there is a repeat of his actions and orders him to provide all the intel he has on Edward. After agreeing to Richard's demands, Sam goes home that night and is relaxing on his couch with a newspaper. Suddenly, Sam and his wife are attacked by Hudgens, who infected him with the parasite that attaches to the spine. The following morning, Aline goes over to Edward's place to show him what she has discovered. She explains that the pieces found all over the world, including the one he discovered, fit together perfectly and were used to pinpoint a geographical location. While they're discussing their next move, the light suddenly begins to flicker, which makes Edward realize that trouble is at the door. While Edward is looking around his loft, he is startled by his disappeared friend John, who has turned evil. After Alien shoots John in the back, the couple are attacked by an array of parasite-controlled zombies and large beasts. The paranormal phenomenon attracts Bureau 713's attention, and agents start dropping into Edward's loft left and right. When Richard and his team arrive, he first assumes that Edward is one of the infected, but changes his mind when Edward ends up saving his life. Once the area is clear, Richard tells Edward that both Sam and Hudgens are missing. Richard then flies them out to a remote location where his team informs him there is a high EMF reading. When they arrive, Edward feels a sense of familiarity with the place, as if he had been there before, and points out the road they need to go. Taking some of his men, Richard follows Edward and Aline into an old mining tunnel. After journeying as deep as the tunnel would take them, they finally arrive at a dead end. Although Richard suggests they return and find another entrance, Edward is sure that they are in the right place. When he shines his light on the roof, they see Abkhani symbols etched on the edges of the circular roof. One of the soldiers thinks he sees something and kneels to check it out, but the ground breaks under him, causing him to fall into a deep hole. Up on the hill overlooking the camp, Hudgens watches the soldiers with indifference and releases the monstrous creatures upon them. Hearing the disturbance in the area, the group of soldiers get ready to take down the beasts. Although they attempt to keep them at bay, the monsters are too many and manage to kill all the soldiers, picking them out one by one. Down in the tunnel, Edward and the others decide to go down through the hole their friend had fallen in, barely making it before a trap smashed down over them. As they jump to the side, one of the other soldiers hurts her leg and is unable to walk. While she is writhing in pain, a snake-like creature slithers out from the sand and bites her in the leg, killing her instantly. Although saddened by the loss, the team knows that they need to continue. Opening up a closed-off wall with an explosive, they walk inside and find a lab with 20 gurneys all around. In the leg of each gurney, they see a name, and Edward is surprised to see his own, realizing what happened to him all those years ago. As they see the blueprints and charts all over the place, they realize Hudgens and the others had created the creatures with a belief that something was coming, which angers Richard, thinking that his men had died for nothing. Suddenly, one of the men discovers a level and pulls it, revealing a door that can only be opened with the artifacts they had found. While Edward is about to open it, Aline suggests that some doors need to remain shut. Hearing her warning, Edward holds himself back from opening it when suddenly gunshots start blaring as Hudgens shoots the only other soldier remaining with them and then warns them to get away from the door. Gun in hand, he takes the artifact from them and adds the missing piece before walking over to the door and turning the key. Using a sleight of hand, Richard throws the knife he had been hiding on his back, stabbing Hudgens right in the chest. But it seemed it was too late, as Hudgens had already managed to open the door. The three slowly walk to the open gate and are shocked to see a vast expanse of darkness where hundreds of thousands of those scary creatures roamed, and once the gate was opened, they all started heading for it. After closing the other gate, they all start running to the tunnel, but Richard realizes the detonator is too far for the signal and decides to return, telling Richard and Aline to head out. Returning to the door, Richard detonates the bomb and jumps into the land of darkness to avoid the explosion, causing the whole cave to crumble and close up. Meanwhile, Edward and Aline have found a ladder that leads to a way out and manages to closely avoid the fire coming through the tunnels. Edward and Aline return to the city, but find that the entire city has been evacuated because opening the gates has brought evil into the world. The movie ends as the two are walking through the street and something runs toward them.